If your business slows down the moment you step away, this episode is for you. If every decision, approval, and problem still runs through you, even though you've hired help, I want you to listen closely. Because when everything depends on you, that's not leadership, that's a bottleneck.
You're listening to the Off Balance Podcast, where faith, family, and business collide. Hosted by Brooks Deming, Doctor of Business Administration, business coach, and resilience expert. Each episode features real-life conversations to help entrepreneurs like you build resilience and lead with confidence.
Welcome back to Off Balance. I'm your host, Dr. Brooks. This podcast is for entrepreneurs and professionals who want clarity, structure, and sustainable growth. So far this season, we talked about structure, busyness, HR risk, motivation, and classification. Today, we're talking about one of the most common growth ceilings, the founder bottleneck. And yes, it shows up even in businesses that are making money. Most founders don't wake up one day and decide to become the bottleneck. It rarely starts with ego, it starts with responsibility. You care deeply about the work, you care about your clients, you care about your reputation. You built this from the ground up. So, of course, you stay close to it. In the early stages, that involvement is necessary. You are the marketing department, you are operations, you are quality control, you are the decision maker and executor. And in the beginning, that level of control, it feels productive. But here's what slowly shifts. What began as leadership involvement becomes operational dependence. Team members start checking with you before moving forward, not because they're incapable, but because you've trained them to. You answer every question, you fix every mistake, you rewrite their emails, you approve every small decision. Over time, people stop exercising judgment. Processes don't get documented because it's faster if I can just handle it. Expectations aren't written down because everyone knows how we do it. Decision authority isn't clarified because I'll just make the call. So the systems live in your head, and that feels efficient until it isn't. Because now, if you step away for a day, things stall. If you take a vacation, inboxes pile up. If you get sick, momentum drops. The business doesn't pause because of workload. It pauses because decision flows runs through one person, you. And that's a subtle shift most founders don't see. When progress requires your constant approval, your presence becomes the gatekeeper of growth. Not because you're controlling, not because your team lacks talent, but because structure was never transferred. Leadership is not about staying involved in everything. It's about building systems that allow movement without you. If your calendar determines your company's capacity, you're not leading at scale. You're sustaining a dependency. A dependency always limits growth. The real shift happens when you ask, what decisions am I still holding that no longer require my expertise? What knowledge is sitting in my head that should be documented? Where have I confused control with quality? Because sustainable businesses don't move because the founder is present. They move because the structure is clear. What does becoming a bottleneck really cost you? Because becoming the bottleneck doesn't just slow down the business, it slowly drains the leader. First, it costs you your time. The first time your calendar starts filling with decisions that shouldn't require your level of authority, those quick approvals, clarifying questions, minor corrections, small operational issues that could have been resolved at a lower level. But because roles weren't clearly defined or decision authority wasn't delegated, and the result is everything flowing upward. So instead of focusing on strategy, partnerships, revenue growth, or innovation, you spend your day answering Slack messages and putting out small fires. You're busy, but you're not necessarily moving the business forward. And over time, that misalignment, it compounds. The second thing is it's costing energy. Decision fatigue is real. When every choice runs through you, even the small ones, your cognitive load increases dramatically. You begin the day sharp. By midday, you're drained. By evening, you're reacting instead of thinking. everything starts to feel heavier than it should, not because the work is impossible, but because you're carrying too much of it mentally. When systems are weak, leaders compensate emotionally, and that compensation is exhausting. The third thing is growth. You cannot scale what only exists in your head. If processes are not documented, they cannot be replicated. If the expectations are written, they can't be measured. If decision criteria are defined, they cannot be delegated. That means every time you grow, hire someone new, add a service, expand capacity, you are re explaining instead of expanding. Growth becomes slower than it should be, not because demand isn't there, but because the infrastructure isn't. And finally, your peace. This is the cost that most leaders don't anticipate. You're always on. Even when you're technically off, your mind is running through pending decisions. You're anticipating problems before they happen. You're checking messages just in case. You become the safety net for everything. And while that may look like dedication from the outside, internally it creates tension. You feel indispensable, but you're also trapped. Sustainable leadership is not about being needed all the time. It's about building systems strong enough that the organization moves forward without constant supervision. If your presence is required for momentum, that's not leadership strength, that's structural vulnerability. And the longer it continues, the higher the cost. From an HR perspective, this is a role clarity issue, and role clarity is not optional in any performance driven environment. When roles aren't clearly defined, people default upward. If someone isn't sure whether they have decision authority, they pause. If expectations aren't documented, they double check. And hesitation creates delay. So what happens? Every question flows up to the founder, not because the team lacks competence, but because the structure lacks clarity. If authority isn't delegated, decisions stall. If performance standards aren't documented, feedback feels personal. Structure gives people permission to act. When someone knows this is my responsibility, this is my decision range, this is how success is measured, they move confidently. Without structure, everything flows upward. With structure, decisions flow outward. And that's the difference. And that difference determines whether a founder feels overwhelmed or supported. Let me give you a real example. I worked with a founder who had a small but capable team. Revenue was stable, clients were satisfied. On paper, everything looked fine, but she was exhausted. Every client email was CC'd to her. Every refund request required her approval. Every scheduling issue came back to her. Every small marketing adjustment had to be reviewed by her before going live. When we mapped it out, the issue wasn't workload, it was undefined authority. There were no written roles description, no decision thresholds, no documented performance metrics, no clarity around what required escalation and what didn't. So the team defaulted to the safest option. Ask her. Once we created clear role definitions, documented decision boundaries, and established what required escalation versus independent action, something shifted. Within weeks, her inbox volume dropped, her calendar opened, her stress decreased. Nothing dramatic changed operationally, but clarity redistributed the responsibility to her team. That's what role clarity does. It protects leadership capacity. Now let's shift to the coaching lens. Because structurally, this is clear. Emotionally, it's harder. So, from a coaching standpoint, the bottleneck often comes from fear, not incompetence, not arrogance, fear. Fear of losing control, fear of making damaging mistakes to the brand, fear that if you're not involved in everything, the quality will drop, fear of becoming unnecessary. And the last one is rarely admitted. When you have built something from nothing, your identity gets attached to being needed, being the fixer, being the problem solver, being the standard setter. Letting go can feel like you're giving up importance, but leadership isn't about being needed for everything. It's about building something that works without you. That's the difference between responsibility and control. Responsibility says, I ensure the system works. Control says, I must personally execute or approve everything. The founder I mentioned earlier admitted something powerful. She said, if they don't need me for the small things, What exactly is my role? That question revealed a deeper issue. Her value had shifted from strategic leader to operational gatekeeper, and that shift wasn't sustainable. Once she stepped into strategic leadership, defining direction, building systems, mentoring her team, her role became more impactful, not less. So letting go doesn't diminish your importance, it elevates it. Letting go is not abandoning responsibility, it's exercising it at the right level. Because if you're buried in minor approvals, you are not leading at your highest capacity. You are maintaining, and maintenance feels busy, but it doesn't create expansion. True leadership requires the discipline to build systems strong enough to function without constant supervision. It requires trust, documentation, clear boundaries, and emotional maturity. Because eventually, growth will demand that you step back from the weeds. The question is whether you do it intentionally or whether burnout forces you to. And that's the real shift. I tell you all the time, leadership is not about being indispensable. It's about building something that is. In adult education, independence is the goal, not dependence, not constant supervision, not learned helplessness. Adults perform best when they understand three core things: their responsibilities, their decision making authority, the outcomes that they are accountable for. That framework is foundational in adult learning theory. Adults are not blank slates. They bring experience, they bring judgment, they bring problem solving capacity. But the capacity only activates when the environment allows it. When expectations are vague, adults hesitate. When authority is unclear, they defer. When accountability is inconsistent, they disengage. Clarity is what unlocks autonomy. Think about it this way: if someone knows this is my lane, these are my boundaries, this is what success looks like, they don't need to ask permission to operate. They move. But when everything requires approval, confidence slowly erodes. At first, people ask to be safe. Then they act out of habit. Eventually, they stop thinking independently altogether, not because they lack intelligence, but because the system trained them to wait. And when people wait, growth slows. From an adult learning perspective, autonomy fuels engagement. When individuals are trusted with clear parameters, they step up. When they understand how their work connects to measurable outcomes, they take ownership. When they have defined authority, they exercise judgment. Structure doesn't restrict adults, it stabilizes the environment so they can operate confidently within it. Without structure, authority becomes personality driven. With structure, authority becomes role driven. That difference determines whether your team develops or depends. Independence is not accidental, it is designed. And if your team constantly seeks approval, that is not a talent issue, it's a clarity issue. Structure empowers others to step up, and stepping up is what turns employees into leaders. The shift from bottleneck to leader isn't about doing less, it's about deciding differently. In early stages of building anything, you have to do almost everything. That's normal. You are providing the concept, you are protecting the vision, you are setting a standard. But there comes a point where continuing to operate as the primary doer limits what you're capable of building. The real shift begins with better questions. What truly requires my expertise? Not what I prefer to control, not what I'm used to touching. What genuinely requires my strategic judgment? What can be systemized? If something is repeated more than twice, it should not live only in your memory. It should live in a documented process. That's how capacity expands. What can be delegated with clarity? Notice I didn't say delegated blindly. Delegation without clarity creates confusion. Delegation with structure creates ownership. When roles are defined, when decision authority is clear, when outcomes are measurable, delegation stops feeling risky. It starts feeling responsible. Leadership is not about carrying everything. It's about building capacity in other people. If your team grows but your involvement never decreases, that's not expansion, that's accumulation. True leadership multiplies output without multiplying personal strain. And that only happens when systems replace constant supervision. Here's the reframe: if your business cannot function without you, it's not fully a business yet. It's an operation centered on a person. And that's not an insult. It's not failure. It's a signal that structure has not caught up with growth. Growth often happens faster than infrastructure. Revenue increases, clients increase, team members increase, but documentation doesn't, decision boundaries don't, performance systems don't. So you end up with expansion sitting on top of a fragile foundation. That's when stress increases. That's when burnout creeps in. That's when everything feels heavier than it should. The problem isn't ambition, it's timing. Structure must grow at the same pace as revenue. When it doesn't, leaders feel the weight personally. And the weight is unnecessary because this isn't about working harder, it's about building smarter. If you're recognizing yourself in this conversation, if you're thinking, yes, I am the one everything flows through, this is exactly what we address inside the business and HR audit. That session is not motivational, it's diagnostic. We identify where you are the bottleneck. We determine what can be delegated immediately. We clarify what requires structure before it can be released. We design leadership capacity so the business does not depend solely on you. You don't need more effort. You need alignment between growth and structure. If you're ready to move from carrying everything to leading effectively, the link to book your audit is in the show description. And if you have enjoyed this episode, I invite you to tune in to the next episode, where we're going to talk about why scaling too early breaks businesses and how to know if you are ready to grow. Because growth without infrastructure is instability. Until then, remember this. Leadership is not doing everything. It's building something that works with or without you. Talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening. Please rate this episode and share it with your family and friends. To learn more about your host or to book a coaching session, visit www.brooksdeming.com. Until next time, rise.
Hi, I'm Tiffany of Tiffany Brown Designs. With over 20 years of creative experience across industries, I create and elevate brands one design at a time through intentional graphic and brand design, polished film and video editing, and creative artistry. Even the music you're hearing right now, that was produced by me. I also create custom tracks for websites, intros and outros, and content. So what are you waiting for? Visit TiffanyCBrownGD.com and let's bring your vision to life.